attributes on page 1, right at the top in the center. And then I hid the fact that I haven't worked.
In 1982, American television found itself standing at a quiet crossroads. The optimism of the post-war decades had faded, the turbulence of the 70s still lingered, and a new cultural mood was taking shape. Into this moment arrived Family Ties, a series that, beneath its familiar sitcom structure, captured a generational conversation that many households were already living behind closed doors. It presented a family not divided by love, but by ideas, by memory, and by sharply different interpretations of what the American dream had become. At the center of the story was a household shaped by idealism. Stephen and Elise Keaton were former activists, children of the 60s who had carried their beliefs into adulthood with sincerity rather than nostalgia. They believed in community, in shared responsibility, and in the idea that personal fulfillment should not come at the expense of others. Their home was warm, expressive, and intentionally informal, reflecting values rooted more in conscience than convention. Then there was Alex P. Keaton, their eldest son, who seemed to arrive from an entirely different decade. Where his parents spoke the language of social progress, Alex spoke fluently in ambition, markets, and competition. His admiration for wealth, structure, and authority was not played merely for laughs. It was presented as a genuine worldview, shaped by a changing America that no longer trusted idealism as easily as it once had. This contrast gave the series its spark, but also its depth. What made Family Ties distinctive was its refusal to treat this ideological divide as a problem to be solved. The series did not position one generation as right and the other as misguided. Instead, it allowed their differences to coexist, sometimes clashing, sometimes harmonizing, always grounded in mutual affection. The Keaton family argued passionately, but they remained connected. Love was never conditional on agreement. The timing of the show's debut was crucial. The early 80s marked a shift toward individualism and economic confidence, a period when success was increasingly measured by personal achievement rather than collective good. Alex Keaton embodied this shift with almost unsettling clarity. His fascination with suits, briefcases, and conservative values was exaggerated, yet rooted in a reality that audiences recognized. He was not a caricature, he was a reflection. Michael J. Fox's performance gave Alex a complexity that elevated the entire series. His delivery was sharp, controlled, and precise but never empty. Beneath the confidence was insecurity, a need to be taken seriously, and a quiet fear of failure. Fox understood that Alex's arrogance worked only if it masked vulnerability, and that balance made the character both amusing and strangely sympathetic. The show's creators did not initially expect Alex to dominate the narrative. Early episodes positioned the parents as the emotional center, with the children orbiting their worldview. Yet audience response quickly revealed something unexpected. Viewers were captivated by the tension Alex brought to every scene, not because they agreed with him, but because he articulated a generational anxiety that was rarely spoken aloud. His success reshaped the series, gradually shifting its focus without abandoning its original heart. Stephen Keaton, portrayed with calm warmth, became the show's moral anchor. His quiet patience and reflective demeanor offered a counterweight to Alex's intensity. He did not attempt to overpower his son's beliefs. Instead, he questioned them gently, often allowing silence to do the work of persuasion. This approach reflected a deeper confidence in his values, one that did not require constant defense. Elise Keaton added another essential dimension. As an architect, she represented creativity grounded in practicality. She was expressive without being chaotic, idealistic without being naive. Her presence balanced the household, offering emotional intelligence rather than ideological certainty. In many ways, she functioned as the connective tissue of the family, understanding each perspective without needing to resolve them. The physical space of the Keaton home reinforced these themes. The set design avoided rigidity. Furniture felt lived in, walls were adorned with personal touches, and the environment suggested openness rather than hierarchy. This visual warmth contrasted deliberately with Alex's increasingly formal appearance, emphasizing how ideology manifested not only in dialogue, but in posture, clothing, and space. Unlike many sitcoms of the era, Family Ties trusted its audience to recognize nuance. Jokes were not merely setups and punchlines, they often emerged from character contradictions. Laughter followed recognition rather than surprise. This approach gave the series a rhythm closer to conversational drama than traditional comedy, allowing emotional beats to land without interruption. The writing frequently drew on contemporary concerns without anchoring itself to fleeting references. Economic uncertainty, generational guilt, and shifting social roles appeared organically through family interactions rather than topical commentary. This restraint gave the series longevity, allowing it to be revisited without feeling dated or instructional. One of the show's quiet strengths was its treatment of memory. Stephen and Elise's past as activists was not romanticized, nor dismissed. It existed as a lived experience that shaped their parenting, their expectations, and their disappointments. Alex's rejection of that past was not cruel but pragmatic. He admired results more than intentions, stability more than protest. This tension mirrored conversations happening across the country, as ideals met outcomes. The younger siblings, though less central, contributed to the emotional texture of the household. They observed, absorbed, and reacted to the ideological crossfire with curiosity rather than judgment. Their presence reminded viewers that values are not inherited intact, but interpreted, reshaped, and sometimes discarded. The family became a living system rather than a static moral example. From a production standpoint, Family Ties embraced simplicity. Camera work was unobtrusive, editing precise, and performances prioritized clarity over exaggeration. This restraint allowed the dialogue and relationships to carry the weight of the storytelling. The series understood that its power lay not in spectacle but in recognition. Music, too, played a subtle role. The theme conveyed optimism without insistence, suggesting continuity rather than triumph. It framed the series as a reflection on connection, not conflict. Even as arguments unfolded, the tone remained fundamentally hopeful. What audiences discovered, often gradually, was that Family Ties was not about politics, but about inheritance. Not of money or property but of values, fears, and aspirations. It asked how children respond to the dreams of their parents, and how parents adapt when those dreams are reinterpreted rather than fulfilled. The series did not offer answers. It offered a space where disagreement could exist without collapse. That alone made it unusual. In a medium often driven by resolution, Family Ties found its strength in continuation. Conversations did not end, they evolved. Looking back, the show feels less like a product of its time and more like a bridge between eras. It captured a moment when certainty was fragmenting, and families were renegotiating what progress meant. Its humor softened the edges, but its insight remained clear. As the series continued to unfold, Family Ties grew increasingly confident in its ability to balance humor with emotional precision. What initially appeared to be a generational contrast evolved into a deeper exploration of identity shaped by circumstance. The Keaton household became a place where competing philosophies did not cancel each other out, but revealed their limitations through daily interaction. Alex Keaton's worldview, so sharply defined in the early episodes, began to show subtle fractures. His devotion to order, success, and financial logic was unwavering, yet moments emerged when that certainty faltered. These moments were not played for spectacle. They arrived quietly, often when his carefully constructed confidence collided with personal loss, disappointment, or emotional responsibility. The series understood that ambition, when examined closely, carries its own vulnerabilities. What made these shifts compelling was the show's refusal to soften Alex into a more agreeable figure. He did not abandon his beliefs, nor did he apologize for them. Instead, the writing allowed his experiences to add depth rather than correction. He remained competitive, driven, and uncompromising, but increasingly aware that intellect alone could not shield him from uncertainty. This awareness gave the character a gravity rarely afforded to sitcom protagonists of the era. Stephen and Elise, meanwhile, were portrayed with growing complexity. Their past idealism, once a source of quiet pride, occasionally surfaced as doubt. They were not immune to questioning whether their values had prepared their children for the realities of the world they now faced. These doubts were never framed as regret, but as reflection. The series respected their introspection, presenting it as a natural evolution rather than a failure. The dialogue between parents and son became more layered as a result. Arguments were no longer purely ideological. They became personal, rooted in concern rather than contradiction. Stephen's calm reasoning and Elise's emotional intuition often revealed a deeper fear beneath Alex's bravado, the fear of instability, of falling behind, of not being taken seriously in a world that rewarded certainty over compassion. The show's ability to shift tone without disrupting its rhythm was one of its greatest strengths. Episodes moved seamlessly from light-hearted exchanges to moments of quiet intensity. These transitions felt earned because they emerged from character rather than plot. The laughter never diminished the seriousness of the emotions involved. It simply made them more accessible. Supporting characters gained greater significance during this phase. Friends, teachers, and romantic interests entered the Keaton orbit not as distractions, but as mirrors reflecting different responses to the same cultural moment. Through these interactions, the series expanded its perspective beyond the family, situating their internal debates within a broader social context. Romantic storylines, particularly those involving Alex, were handled with restraint. They were less about sentiment and more about exposure. Relationships challenged his assumptions about control and predictability. Emotions did not always align with logic, and the show allowed that discomfort to remain unresolved. Love, like ideology, proved resistant to strict management. Visually, the series maintained its understated aesthetic. The camera remained unobtrusive, allowing performances to carry emotional weight. Close-ups were used sparingly, making them more impactful when they appeared. Silence continued to play an important role, often lingering just long enough to invite reflection rather than explanation. The pacing of the episodes reflected a growing confidence in the audience's attention. Scenes were not rushed toward punchlines. Conversations unfolded naturally, with space for hesitation and reconsideration. This deliberate tempo gave the show a maturity that distinguished it from more formulaic comedies of the time. The cultural backdrop of the early 1980s remained present without overwhelming the narrative. Economic optimism, shifting political attitudes, and changing definitions of success influenced character choices without becoming overt commentary. The series trusted viewers to recognize these influences without needing them spelled out. Music and sound design continued to support this restraint. Transitions were gentle, avoiding dramatic cues that might dictate emotional response. This subtlety reinforced the sense that Family Ties was less interested in instructing its audience than in inviting them to observe. What became increasingly evident was the show's commitment to empathy. No character was reduced to a symbol. Alex was not merely a stand-in for conservative ambition, nor were his parents relics of a fading idealism. Each was treated as a person navigating uncertainty with the tools available to them. This balance allowed the series to explore disagreement without vilification. The humor itself matured alongside the characters. Jokes were often rooted in irony rather than exaggeration. The comedy trusted intelligence, relying on timing and context rather than obvious setups. This approach rewarded attentive viewers, particularly those who recognized the cultural nuances embedded in the dialogue. As the seasons progressed, Family Ties revealed its deeper concern: how families endure change without losing connection. The Keatons did not resolve their differences, but they learned to live within them. Disagreement became a constant rather than a crisis, an ongoing conversation rather than a battle. This portrayal resonated strongly with audiences who recognized similar dynamics in their own lives. The series did not present an ideal family, but a resilient one. Its conflicts were not extraordinary, they were familiar. That familiarity gave the show its emotional credibility. The absence of clear victories or defeats reinforced this realism. No argument definitively settled a debate. No episode delivered a final answer. Instead, the series suggested that understanding is provisional, shaped by experience and revisited over time. This openness made the narrative feel honest rather than constructed. By this stage, Family Ties had firmly established its identity. It was no longer simply a sitcom with a clever premise. It had become a study of generational dialogue, framed through humor but grounded in genuine curiosity about how values evolve. The show's success lay in its patience. It allowed characters to grow without demanding transformation. It permitted contradiction without forcing resolution. In doing so, it captured something enduring about family life: that love often survives not because differences disappear, but because they are carried together. For a mature audience revisiting the series, these episodes offer a particular kind of recognition. The arguments feel less urgent, the positions less absolute, but the emotions more resonant. What once seemed like ideological conflict reveals itself as something more intimate: the struggle to be understood by those who know you best. In this way, Family Ties deepened its original premise, transforming generational contrast into emotional continuity. It reminded viewers that families are not defined by agreement, but by the willingness to remain engaged. That quiet insistence on connection, expressed through wit and restraint, is what allows the series to continue speaking across decades with clarity and warmth. As Family Ties continued to mature, the series grew increasingly reflective, turning its attention from ideological contrast to emotional consequence. The arguments remained, but they became quieter, more personal, shaped less by theory and more by experience. The Keaton home evolved into a space where belief systems were tested not by debate alone, but by the unpredictable weight of life itself. Alex Keaton, so often defined by certainty, was gradually placed in situations where control proved elusive. Academic competition, professional aspiration, and romantic involvement exposed cracks in his carefully maintained confidence. The show handled these moments with restraint. Rather than dismantling his convictions, it allowed them to be challenged by reality. Ambition remained his compass, but it no longer guaranteed clarity. This subtle shift gave his character a new dimension, transforming him from a clever provocateur into a figure of genuine dramatic interest. What distinguished these developments was the absence of moral correction. Alex was not taught a lesson in the conventional sense. He did not renounce his values or adopt those of his parents. Instead, he learned that conviction does not eliminate vulnerability. This realization unfolded gradually, often without commentary, trusting the audience to recognize the emotional undercurrent beneath the humor. Stephen and Elise's role during this phase became increasingly introspective. Their confidence as parents was no longer absolute. They began to confront the possibility that influence does not always produce alignment. Their love for Alex remained constant, but it was accompanied by a growing awareness that guidance does not guarantee inheritance. This recognition was portrayed not as disappointment, but as acceptance, lending their characters a quiet maturity. The series showed particular sensitivity in how it depicted moments of shared grief or loss. When the family faced hardship, ideological differences receded, replaced by a deeper bond rooted in empathy. These episodes revealed the show's understanding that values, however strongly held, often yield to emotion in moments of crisis. The humor softened, the pacing slowed, and the focus shifted to presence rather than persuasion. One of the show's most effective choices was its willingness to allow silence to carry meaning. Scenes frequently ended without resolution, leaving conversations unfinished. These pauses invited reflection rather than instruction, reinforcing the idea that understanding within a family is an ongoing process. The absence of closure became a form of honesty. The younger members of the household continued to serve as quiet observers of these dynamics. Their reactions were not framed as judgments, but as responses shaped by proximity. They absorbed the tension between ambition and idealism without being forced to choose sides. This approach underscored a central theme of the series, that identity forms through exposure as much as intention. The external world increasingly pressed in on the Keaton family, bringing with it the realities of adulthood. Careers advanced, relationships complicated, and responsibilities multiplied. These developments were never sensationalized. They arrived as natural extensions of time passing, grounding the series in a lived-in realism that set it apart from more episodic comedies. Alex's professional aspirations in particular, introduced a new layer of tension. His desire for success placed him in environments that rewarded competition over connection. The show explored this contrast with care, allowing the audience to see both the appeal and the cost of such a path. Achievement offered validation, but it also demanded compromise. The series neither condemned nor celebrated this exchange, it simply observed it. Stephen's responses during this period were marked by restraint. He rarely attempted to intervene directly, choosing instead to remain available. His trust in dialogue over authority reflected a belief in personal agency, even when outcomes were uncertain. This patience gave his character a moral steadiness that did not depend on being right. Elise, too, navigated these changes with emotional intelligence. She recognized shifts before they were articulated, responding with empathy rather than alarm. Her role as a listener, often underestimated, became essential. She understood that growth could not be directed, only supported. This insight grounded the series' portrayal of parenthood in realism rather than idealism. From a storytelling perspective, the show's structure remained deceptively simple. Episodes followed familiar rhythms, yet within those rhythms, complexity flourished. Humor emerged organically from character interaction, not from exaggerated scenarios. This consistency allowed the series to explore serious themes without abandoning its tonal identity. The cultural context of the early 1980s continued to shape the narrative subtly. Conversations about success, responsibility, and self-definition reflected a society renegotiating its priorities. Family Ties did not position itself as commentary, but as conversation. It mirrored the questions being asked in living rooms across the country, offering recognition rather than answers. One of the series' enduring strengths was its respect for contradiction. Characters were allowed to hold conflicting beliefs without being diminished. Alex could be ambitious and compassionate, confident and uncertain. Stephen and Elise could be principled and flexible. This refusal to simplify human experience gave the show its emotional credibility. As time passed, the humor itself took on a quieter quality. Laughs were less frequent but more resonant. They emerged from understanding rather than surprise. The audience was no longer invited merely to react but to recognize. This shift reflected the show's growing trust in its viewers, particularly those who had aged alongside the characters. The Keaton family's resilience became the series' emotional core. They did not overcome difference by eliminating it, but by accommodating it. This accommodation was not passive. It required effort, patience, and the willingness to remain present. The show presented this endurance not as idealized harmony, but as a realistic form of love. By this stage, Family Ties had moved beyond its original premise. It was no longer simply a portrait of generational contrast. It had become a meditation on continuity, on how families persist through disagreement, change, and time. The humor remained, but it was now layered with a sense of history, both personal and cultural. For viewers revisiting the series, these episodes carry a particular resonance. What once felt like sharp debate now reads as emotional negotiation. The stakes feel less ideological and more human. The series reveals itself as less concerned with who is right, and more concerned with how people stay connected when certainty dissolves. In embracing this perspective, Family Ties distinguished itself from many of its contemporaries. It chose depth over resolution, empathy over instruction. Its characters did not arrive at conclusions. They arrived at understanding, provisional and incomplete. That incompleteness is what gives the series its enduring authenticity. As the narrative continued forward, it did so with confidence in its own restraint. It understood that the most meaningful developments are often the least dramatic. A change in tone, a pause in conversation, a softened response. These were the moments where the series found its truth.